And can everybody, just for the camera, can you go through and identify yourself real quick, and then I'll let you start your spiel, Courtney.
Sure. I'm Courtney Senna with Lynchburg Social Services. I'm a senior worker in the foster care unit.
I'm Crawford Keenan. I'm an attorney in Lynchburg and do garden ad litem and court-appointed work in Lynchburg and in Campbell primarily.
And I'm James Polk, and I'm the intake supervisor at the Blue Ridge Regional Jail in Lynchburg, Virginia.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys.
All right. So as far as working with parents who are incarcerated, there would sort of be two different thoughts. One would be if they are incarcerated at the start of the case, and one is the parents who get incarcerated during the course of a case. If we have a case open and the parent is incarcerated at the time, we want to find out why they're incarcerated and what kind of sentence they're looking at if they've been sentenced. They may still be in jail going through the criminal process. If they are going to be getting out or probably getting out during the course of the foster care case, it's going to be very important that we offer them services while they are in jail so that they are not as disadvantaged at the case when they get out, and so that they are already engaged in their services that they can then continue once they are out and beginning their visitations and the other portions of their case. If they are serving a long-term sentence, it's still going to be important to engage with them, introduce yourself, let them know what's going on with their children, and we find them to be a really valuable resource to tap into as far as locating relatives. Just because a parent is unable to be a caretaker for their child does not mean that they cannot be part of planning for their child. And so we would want to get their input on what their concerns are, what their understanding is of why their child came into care and how they feel about that, and what their plans are for their child, especially if they are not going to be the primary caretaker. We frequently get questions about bringing kids to jail for the visit. That is not something that we are generally going to do. If we are working with older kids, teenagers, we will sometimes have the discussion with them about what they would like to see, but in general, we are not going to arrange visitations at the jail or prison. And then if a parent gets incarcerated during the course of a case, it'll kind of end up going the same way as if they're incarcerated at the beginning, except that hopefully they've been engaged in the foster care process up until that point, and simply becoming incarcerated does not take them out of the running as a potential caretaker or as someone who can make plans for their child. So if they become incarcerated, we would want to follow up with them, find out why they are in there and what their expected sentence is, and see if they're willing to continue their services in the jail setting. And then depending on the length of their sentence, hopefully they're able to complete their time and then come back and get back into the case. I know, Christy, you had asked me to say something about paternity testing while parents are incarcerated. They absolutely can be paternity tested while they are in jail. And sometimes we find it to be easier to get that swab there versus expecting them to go to DCSC and get it done on their own. And the judges will order a swab to be done at the jail or the prison. I think that's kind of a good base summary of what we are looking at. We do have service providers who will go to jails. So if we are working with a parent we know is incarcerated, when we do that initial FABT, it's going to be important to make a note of requesting providers who will go. We really only have one psychologist who will do the psychologicals in jail. Dr. Anderson is willing to go. Dr. Barclay is willing to do them with incarcerated persons, but he wants the jail to transport the prisoner to his office, and we haven't really successfully worked that out before. And so Dr. Anderson is kind of our one who is willing to go to the jail and do it. And then for parenting and outpatient counseling, we have a number of providers who are willing to go to the jail and begin those services or continue them if the parent gets incarcerated during the course of the case.
And can I ask a quick?
Sure.
So you're coming from the perspective of Lynchburg. How many non-Lynchburg folks have had providers in cases that have gone and worked with an incarcerated parent, like a parenting coach or counselor? Yes. That's right. Yep. Okay. Would you be willing to kind of name off some of those providers just so
Sure.
that we know kind of who's in our toolkit, who we can
Yeah,
recommend
so
out?
Mary Rice has gone to jail, and so I would presume anyone within her office would do so because I know that she does it as policy. Brandy Stennett goes, and I know people that she's had working for her in the past have gone. She has some newer people now, so I think the opportunity just hasn't come up, but I would assume that they would be willing to go. Eugene Tweedy, who is fairly well known for his mentoring services, but is newly doing outpatient and parenting as well. Yeah, Eugene Tweedy.
Could you speak up just a little?
Sure.
And
Yes.
what are those agency names too?
Yes, Rice Counseling and Associates, Action Family Services, and Tweedy Mentoring Services. Those are the ones I can think of off the top of my head.
Mhm. And can you speak to about how have you seen incarcerated parents participate in cases or be very present in cases, even sometimes in cases where the parent is incarcerated the whole time throughout the timeline, or maybe because you've engaged well with them, they've been able to hit the ground running right when they get out? And
Yeah, so I did have a case with a father who did participate in services while he was incarcerated. He completed his psychological and he began doing outpatient counseling. He was actually working with Dan West back when Dan was at Action Family. Dan is now at Impact, and so he may also, now that I'm thinking about it, be a provider that would be willing to go to the jails. And he, that dad really did actively participate in services, and when he got out, he hit the ground, and we started visitations the same week that he got out because he had stayed in touch with me throughout the whole timeline, and so I knew when he was getting out, so we already had the visitation scheduled for the first week that he was out. He did not ultimately succeed in gaining custody of the children. He had a lot of hurdles to overcome, but he really engaged in the process throughout the whole timeline, and in the end, he kind of came to the decision on his own that the children were going to be best in the foster home where they had been. But he engaged very well. I've also had parents provide me with lots of relative information and really stress certain relatives that they would like to see get their children. I have had parents tell me that they are not appropriate caregivers, that they know that they cannot take care of their children. And usually in those situations, they've expressed to me that they would like to see their children be adopted because they don't feel as though the other parent is a good caretaker either. But I've had quite a few parents that will exchange letters with me when they're in jail. I'll send them updates. I mentioned visitations earlier as something we don't really do, but I have and regularly do send pictures and updates on how the children are doing, what they're doing, and that way the parents do kind of feel like they're getting to know the kids and staying connected with them even while they are not physically present in their lives. And so I've had some fairly good success engaging with parents in that way.
And what we might do too, because if people in the room are having trouble hearing, this might make it easier. Here's the mic, and it'll probably be people watching on Facebook too.
All right. I have rarely been accused of talking too softly, so this is new for me.
Okay. I'm sure we may circle back, but yeah, anyone have any questions right now for Courtney?
Experience where a parent maybe participate with family partnership even by helping mother or two?
Or fact?
I have not personally had that experience, but I do know. Yes. So Lorna was asking if we have had a parent participate in a family partnership meeting or a FAPT meeting while incarcerated. That is part of the family partnership model and protocol, and so I have not personally had that, but I do know of at least one case where we had an incarcerated parent participate by phone in an FPM. So it is out there.
Yep. And I'll confirm too, because Laura had a case where we were able to facilitate the incarcerated father's participation in the FAPT meeting by phone. And and I'm sure you'll expound on this, but what we were told by the jail is that FAPT, because that lasts 15, maybe up to 30 minutes, not longer typically, and FPM is usually budgeted for like 2 hours. The jail has told us that an FPM could be really difficult because it takes kind of, I think, one-to-one manpower to supervise that person, but FAPT, they can do that no problem. So that's a really exciting possibility. And Laura, it might be interesting, can you tell a little bit, so you had an incarcerated father in your case, but he was very present throughout the case. Could you talk a little bit about how, yeah.
He was glad to be part of it, so we had him on his home,
Yep.
like before the jail at that time. And I was just told the jail ahead of time, and yeah, it arranged. Yeah.
On your chin.
Well, and I'll also say, so whenever we visited the home, the mom who had the kids in a trial home placement, she put money on Dad's account, and he would call home about every day. Yeah, and every time you were in the home, the kids were showing us pictures of like drawings and letters that he'd sent them. And actually, the kids were older in the case, so pretty consistently they set it up with a provider to take them in like once a week or once a month or something for supervised visits. And once the kids were back in the trial home placement, mom took them every week, and even when a new baby was born, they took them every week. And we also advocated for Dad to be able to be transported to court. And again, I'm still kind of figuring out the formula of who gets transported when, does it depend on locality. But anyway, so yeah. Okay. So anybody else?
Courtney, is there ever a time where maybe you extend the length of the case if it looks like the incarcerated parent could be a viable option for placement?
Yes, so the case that I mentioned earlier with the dad who engaged in services, we actually were going to permanency on that case in November of that year, and Dad was not getting out until October and had been incarcerated most of the children's lives. And so when we did go to court, we asked for 6 more months specifically to work with the father in that case.
Can I ask a question about why the general policy is no visits? Is it because it's not good for the kid, or is it a resource problem?
We generally find that it's not the most friendly environment to take the children to, and it can be really confusing for them. And that's kind of been our experience until they're older and can understand more of what's going on, which is the time when we kind of bring them into the discussion about whether or not they're going to participate in the visits.
And like, how old is that? Like 7, 12, 15? I mean, I'm just trying to think, like, when do you start getting more specific that like mom's in a special place and really, really talking about being in jail?
I would say the older ages, 12 and up, would probably be where we're having those discussions.
can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes.
Does the department facilitate phone calls? I mean, I heard the example where the mom was putting money on the account for the dad to call home, but if there's no visitation, is there an opportunity for phone calls facilitated by the department, not facilitated outside of that process?
Right. That would certainly be a possibility. I am not aware of any cases where we have done that, but it would be a possibility.
I have a question. So during the visits to the jail, where do y'all do the visits?
In the like with the children, or when we go in the like the one-on-one
Yeah.
room.
Oh, the one-on-one, like the contact?
Like no, there's no contact. There's like a yeah.
What was that?
He knows what I'm talking about. There's like a plate glass in between.
I want to make sure so I know that the social worker, the caseworkers don't take them, but I've been involved with 2 caseworkers. Custodial grandparent took a 3-year-old and was having difficulty, and I'm in a case now with a 17-year-old, because he's much older. He goes visits his mother now in different county. So when a case is like that, when one of the parents are incarcerated, you all recommend that they not take the child to see them? How does it work? Because in my particular case, every time the child went to see his father, and the next day I make a follow-up, and you can see the child somewhat confused about that.
Yeah. So if we're involved, then the child is in foster care, and so we're making that decision. Now, I would definitely see it as being different if the child and the parent had achieved a trial home placement, like in the case that I guess Laura had, because at that point we are encouraging the parents to make more of those decisions. So we would support them through that and explain what they should expect and how they might be able to simplify it, but or make it go a little bit better. But in while they're in our care and not on a trial home placement, we would be making those decisions.
Do you make those decisions independently from the child's counselor? Do you consult with their counselor to see if the child's ready for that, or it just create more trauma?
Yeah, if there's a counselor involved, we would certainly loop them into that decision-making process. And if we were working with an older child who was expressing that desire, we would want them to process that ahead of time with their counselor to kind of get a better feel for what to expect and what they might feel going through that process.
And as the attorney, you have periodic hearings, and so if the father wants to meet with his children in the jail, that's the time to bring that up, to say, judge, visitation may be at the discretion of DSS, but my client really wants to see his children, and we're asking that the judge would order them, if it's otherwise appropriate, to bring the child to the jail. Just not preclude him from seeing his child because the child's over in the jail. My impression on visiting in jails is it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. How do you maintain contact with your child if you don't see him? And then as a lawyer, sometimes I feel like that comes back and bites you because you didn't push it, and then you're at a permanency hearing and you hear that my client, that the child didn't see his father for 9 months. Well, how do you I don't know, you go along and then you get bitten. I mean, I'm just being a little cynical. You go along, you get bitten, or you gotta put up a fight and end up falling on your sword anyway. So I don't know. So anyway, it's a consideration. But yeah, those periodic hearings are where you would approach the judge about sorting out visitation at the jail.
I was looking to address the comment about children knowing their parents in jail. I mean, I have had children as young as 4 and 5 years old. My dad's in jail. They know. I mean, this is a lifestyle that they've been used to their entire lives sometimes. So I don't think we should ever sugarcoat and say they're in a special place.
Yeah, no, I would not advocate for lying to the children. Just, I think there's a difference between a child being able to verbalize that my parent is in jail versus knowing what that means and what that experience is like.
Can I ask a follow-up question about phone calls? Is there currently any system set up to allow for video conferencing, Facebook calling, Skype calling, something that allows you to interact with?
Not yet. Hopefully this summer, we're gonna be getting tablets at the jail, so they're gonna be able to, that should be one of the capabilities that they're gonna have.
Wow, that's great.
Exciting. Yeah.
I wanted to add that, so as an attorney, I'll have clients I do criminal defense work too, and if I want to have a contact visit in Lynchburg with my client, I actually have to go to the circuit court judge, who then orders the jail to allow me to have contact with my client. And that's just, hi, how you doing? Shake a hand. I mean, have a real conversation. Other jails are not that way. Amherst is far more amenable. Rustburg is just downright easy. I love Rustburg. So the same thing I would imagine with children. If you wanted to have contact, you would just have to ask the judge to order the jail to do it. It is possible, and frankly, I mean, seeing dad through the glass is probably pretty heartbreaking, but actually being able to see and smell and laugh with dad and touch dad, I think would be really important for bonding and attachment.
And sort of a follow-up question on that. Sorry, I feel like we're grilling you about this one particular point, but I would imagine that part of the decision-making about whether to take the child for a jail visit, right, part of it is age, part of it is sort of awareness, the child's craving to see the parent, and I would imagine the bond with the parent beforehand, so it might be different if the parent's been incarcerated their whole life and at a distance, or if they've had a relationship and now the parent is incarcerated. Do you think it's possible, because I feel like at least since when I started casework to now, there's even been a lot of growth in our engagement with incarcerated parents. Do you think that policy of not taking the children to visit an incarcerated parent, do you think that could be sort of a holdover from our thinking and an approach from past? Because like people are saying, I've had cases where, grandparents or other relatives have custody, they're not shying away from taking the kids in, and I would argue, kind of depends on the specific case, but in a lot of times it's much better for that child to have contact with the parent. But I don't know, I can see drawbacks on both sides. So
Yeah, I think a lot will come down to the relationship that existed prior to the child coming into foster care, how long the parent had been incarcerated, what that contact looked like, and that would definitely play a part in the decision as well.
What's been your experience for you, like if a parent's incarcerated for a long period of time and they're not voluntarily giving up right to that child, and you may be able to at what point, talk about filing for permanency and stuff, how does that, what's your experience of that happen when the incarcerated parent says, no, I'm not interested in giving up those rights?
So I think a lot is going to depend on what we're looking at as the permanency plan for that child. So if you have an incarcerated parent long term, but you are actually able to achieve the goal of return home to the other parent, then there's no reason necessarily just on its face to terminate the incarcerated parent's rights. If a return home to that other parent isn't feasible and we're looking at a goal of adoption, then we may have to move towards an involuntary termination with the incarcerated parent. And if we're looking at they're going to be incarcerated, past the child's 18th birthday or for some other long period of time, the one piece I think that the judge is going to be looking for is, did we allow that parent an opportunity to make another plan for the child? And so that's where engaging them on relatives and planning and things like that have come in. And if we have exhausted those efforts to try to plan with the parent, then ultimately ultimately, we're going to be bound to achieve permanency, and if adoption is the only viable goal that we're looking at, then we would be petitioning the court for an involuntary termination.
And I can add that legally speaking, incarceration is not reason enough to terminate parental rights. Though there was a fella, I think his name was Walker, who was up for execution in Virginia, and he had never been out, and they did terminate his rights. But generally speaking, incarceration is never reason enough to. So you end up. That's where Courtney was talking about. You end up looking at was the parent in the child's life before he was incarcerated, he or she was incarcerated. You know, did it happen after? What was the bond like? Like, do you bring him to the jail? Do you figure out kind of what that bond was like, and then ultimately, I mean, as I see it, it's you kind of at some point you end up you see what the end result is going to be, and because the timelines are so short, you begin planning for that eventual result. So, I guess I'm saying is you don't prolong a child's pain, as I see it. You don't prolong a child's pain longer than necessary, or longer than you have to if a parent really is not tenable. Like they've had, there's some issues here. Like they're interesting. Like you get into drug abuse, and a parent who's been addicted for a very long time comes into jail. Just because they're in jail doesn't mean they're clean, or that they've ever had any kind of recovery. And so being in jail, generally speaking, there is no recovery type of environment in jail. There are drugs, there are alcohol still in jail. Generally speaking, from what I hear, I do an AA meeting. I've been sober for 2.5 decades. I do an AA meeting on Tuesday nights out in Amherst. And from what I hear, you can get it. It's just not enough to really make it fun. So you don't get high or drunk, until you get out. And most of them, frankly, have a plan when they get out. They're my friends. I mean, but generally, they're addicts and alcoholics, and a lot of them have a plan when they get out. They hit the street and it's a bar or the bong or the needle, as quickly as possible. So, it's as Courtney was saying, that pre-incarceration relationship is vital, and were they able to participate in their child's life in a meaningful way, it's important.
All right, this seems like a good time to officially pass the mic.
Do we?
Yep.
Again, I'm Crawford Keenan, and I don't like my voice being.
You have another local attorney watching,
Like
so make
this.
sure your information is accurate.
Yeah. So, all right. So recently, I had a client in one of the local courts and J&D courts, and he ended up losing his first attorney because of anger and all that kind of thing. And then they moved to permanency, and they were going to terminate him regardless. And I told him so. I mean, it was pretty clear. He had relapsed as of back from meth like 2 months before permanency, this kind of thing. So there's just no doubt as to what was going to happen. So we agreed to the evidence as being sufficient. The court terminated, and we immediately appealed. The idea being that my client would get out, and he had some things going for him. He had done an anger management course with a non-DSS provider. Sounded like that had gone pretty well. But so we were setting it out, and we were pinning our thin hopes on what would happen in circuit court. And lo and behold, I was sitting out in district court on a different matter, and there he comes in the orange jumpsuit with the manacles and the handcuffs and all the rest. And it turned out that he had relapsed, and then he had picked up a very serious charge. And so that case is still set for a termination hearing or trial in circuit court. And so he has this, he wanted a bond. District court judge refused his bond. was he going, I told him, I said, you have to be out of jail in order to have any chance. You cannot be wearing orange and come to a permanency, your final circuit court hearing on this matter. It's just not going to go well for you. So he talks to his criminal attorney, and they agreed he would not pursue a bond because he didn't want to go in front of the circuit court judge to and hear on a bond hearing and have all of his evidence thrown up in the judge's face, who eventually would be deciding guilt or innocence and disposition. So he stays in jail, and then the question is now I have to go ask him, and I've kind of avoided the issue because we've been getting along pretty well, but I've avoided the issue of asking because he's really between a rock and a hard place. If he goes forward, it'd be the same judge who's going to try his criminal matter. So the evidence is still going to be thrown up in the judge's face as to how this, how my client ended up incarcerated. So it's, he's got a serious problem, and I assume eventually that I'm assuming that he will concede and not spend a day in circuit court making the judge angry for wasting his time on a case where where my client really has no hopes of getting custody back of his child. So those are the kind of unfun conversations you have to have, and when and you just have to tread very lightly. I had an interesting. I learned something the other day. I went out to Buckingham prison, and in the past, when I was doing guard ad litem work for inmates, I could call the counselor at the jail, and the counselor would then pull the guy into the counseling office, and then I could have my conversation with my client with the counselor present, or the counselor would step out. Well, I learned apparently in the prisons now, at least in Buckingham, they're no longer doing that. So I had to drive to Buckingham to have really what was a fairly brief conversation with my client and to find out exactly what his thoughts were. So that was a little discouraging because in the past they made it easier on attorneys to consult with their clients, and now it's getting difficult. Now he can call me, and then one of these questions was, how do I interact with my client or plan with my client? He can call me, and he's been a frequent caller, and so that's anyway. So yeah, thankfully they can call and get to a phone.
Do they have to have money on their account to call their?
And they have to have money on their account. So if they don't have money on their account, then I've got to get in the car and go find them. There's a question about when a parent comes to court for hearings, and the only case in which they absolutely positively have a legal right to be there is the permanency hearing or the circuit court hearing. There were a couple of interesting cases about this. One was a woman or a fellow who was participating at the circuit court trial regarding the custody of his child, and the prison made him get off the phone, and so he missed the last 90 minutes of the hearing. And on appeal, the Virginia Appellate Court overturned the termination and sent it back because he had a legal right to participate in this hearing that profoundly affected his parental rights. Another case was a woman who was in a penitentiary in Arizona, and the judge wouldn't continue the case to bring her, and that case got overturned. So this final case involving termination of parental rights, it's a constitutional right to raise your children, and so they tread very lightly. And tell you the truth, it doesn't feel that way, like they tread very lightly, but apparently they do, and at least they think twice about it. And then so as I was going through the legal case law and whatnot, one of the things that jumped out at me was some of these older cases from 80s and 90s when we didn't have these strict guidelines. These cases went on for years. I mean, you'd have cases going for 3 or 4 years where a child would be in foster care. Now, of course, you know, it's 13 months, and the longest you can postpone it is another 6. I have to ask DSS to know if I'm right or wrong. Not. And historically, these cases went on very, very long. And so the question was, how do shortened timelines affect parental rights? You know, things got to happen pretty fast. So that's what I was saying. You know, you make a decision. A decision gets made fairly quickly with an incarcerated parent, I would imagine, as to exactly what's going to happen. Even though I don't think it probably shows up in a report until fairly late. At least that's what I would assume. Happened. Not that they're hiding the ball. It's just we all kind of know how a case is going, especially with an incarcerated parent. So I had asked one of the local attorneys who represents DSS about this very matter, and his suggestion was, my question to him had been, if a parent is incarcerated and released 11 months into the case, will DSS be disinclined to offer that parent services if that client seems like a good option as a placement? If they're going to be released 11 months into the case, what happens then? And as Courtney had said, some of it revolves around the strength of the relationship before, and then there was the case she had said where they extended it for 6 months to give him a chance, and that's hard with me. That's pretty cool. And this other attorney had said, he's really got to get out of jail and hit the ground running as best he can in order to get. But you think about the stuff he's got to, that this person who's recently released has to get organized. They've got to get housing for a family. They've got to get a job enough to support themselves and children. They've got to get transportation, which is a car and a license. A lot of them don't have licenses when they get out. Maybe they have an ID card. Some of them don't even have all that because they've lost it all when they get arrested. And, they lose all their clothes and everything. They don't lose all their clothes. He'll speak to that. But, they're on a meth fuel binge for a week, and their wallet is in the woods somewhere, and they don't have access to a lot of these materials. So it can be quite daunting to actually get up and running in order to get your feet under you. I think at that point in time, you would start looking at relatives. Can you move in with mom? What sort of service? What kind of help can mom give you? And then you ask your client, well, have you been nice to mom? Because if mom don't want you in her house, you're not going to have a lot of luck with that one, pal. So, as a practical matter, it really helps to be nice to mom throughout life, because in the end of the day, dads come and go, but moms never do. That's what my wife says anyway. So, yeah. So it's a catch-22. We take federal funding. In one of the counties, it's like 90% of the money comes from the feds. We take the funding. They tell us the timelines, and then our local people are not having as much time as they would have previously to get their act together. I guess the idea on the incarceration bed, and then I'll hand the mic over, is that they don't want you to, if you're incarcerated, I guess there are good people who are incarcerated. There are bad people, of course, who are incarcerated. But incarceration shouldn't include losing your children as well. And I think that's why they're pretty fervent about trying to weed out that idea. Are you just terminating because of incarceration? So generally speaking, on appeal, what you see is that the judges have, the appellate courts are loath to overturn an appellate opinion. And especially trial judges have discretion, which means unless they absolutely abuse it, unless they're just way out to lunch, their opinion will not be touched on appeal. So the judges, as it should be, and so unless they're really out to lunch, the case will stand. So you see them very carefully looking at other ramifications in their life. You know, what was the bond before? How long have they been incarcerated? The one case on appeal I did see where the mother, where the judge said, no, you have to give her more time, was a mother, and this is in the old days when they had more time, but the mother had picked up a charge, gotten pregnant, got arrested 9 months later just as the baby was born. She was fervent about contacting DSS and writing letters, trying to do whatever she could to stay in touch with the social services folks. And the judge said in that particular case, I guess given that she never had a chance and seemed otherwise like she had a good shot at it, decided that the court that the termination was premature, that she should get more time. All right, I will pass it over. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned, I guess, parents' rights can't be terminated because the parent is incarcerated. But very seldom do I see an attorney, lack of better expression, play that card. What is truly the court-appointed attorney's responsibility to fight that fight for a parent?
I'm very interested in that question as well, because I don't feel like does it depend somewhat on the judge and or how vigorous the parents' counsel is as to, because I feel like, again, at least just in the cases I've looked through, it feels like it's a more recent shift, and a lot of times we have sort of had this attitude of, well, no, it's a foregone conclusion, we're writing them off, at least in case planning.
Just about everybody who does the court-appointed work also does criminal defense-appointed work. So, and most, I mean, at least in Lynchburg and around here, I think most of the attorneys have a heart. They're not. This isn't Baltimore or Richmond or Washington D.C. where you never ever, where you're so detached from your community that you don't know who you represent. I've never had to argue that issue because it's never, I guess it's never really come up that judge, but for incarceration, my client would be wonderful. It just, you make the best argument you can, and generally when they're incarcerated for pretty damning reasons, that they go to character and safety, child safety, public safety, in this day and age, a lot of drug running, dealing, and all that kind of thing. So, but it's a good question. I think actually the more interesting legal question is, and this is the one that I've never seen played, talking about a card, or on appeal, is this issue of the timelines and the federal funding. Because if a J&D judge knows we only have this amount of time, because otherwise we'll lose our funding, right? Then really that is an issue that is not anywhere in the statute. I mean, it doesn't say concern for public funding is an issue to be taken into consideration. It says what's in the child's best interest. So I don't know, I haven't seen it in any of the case law, but to me that's an interesting way to attack a decision in the circuit court, especially where things are on the record. You kind of save, circuit court's on the record, and that's where people's careers are made or lost. J&D judges, nothing's on the record, and it's kind of like on to circuit court, really. But I think that would be an interesting way to attack a termination, is if you could figure out why it is, if funding in some way, shape, or form entered into the equation. And I don't know that it's never been brought up, but I'm glad I agreed to help tonight because it gave me an idea. So I'm going to cause more trouble.
Well, and maybe that's a question for you too, Courtney. So again, I feel like to some extent it may depend on the worker and also maybe sort of what the culture of the DSS agency is, but what is at least the minimum engagement level that you'd be expected to have with an incarcerated parent? Are you going to get your knuckles rapped if you don't at least send a letter or something? Is sending a letter sufficient? What's kind of the standard of accountability there?
Right. So I would say
And
the
who is holding you accountable? Is it the judge? Is it the DSS agency? Your attorney?
all of the above.
Okay.
So I would say at a minimum, the expectation is that you would send at least several letters if you're looking at like the life of an entire case, and then depending on what you get in return. So I've had parents who will not respond to my letters. So I write my little letters and drop them in the mail, and I never hear a word back from the parents. And so, you know, I might not write to them every month because not much is changing, and they're not giving me anything to respond to. But I'm still going to write to them at least several times through the course of a case. And especially if a parent is local, and especially if they're going to be getting out during the case, I think visiting them at the jail is going to be an expectation as well, because that's where you're really able to talk to them about, you know, what are their plans. And, you know, when I think of our cases with incarcerated parents, I certainly can't say we've never tried to terminate solely because of the incarceration issue, but that's not been my experience. I mean, I think it's usually goes to, you know, we're looking at permanency that addresses the best interest of the child. And if you have a parent who is not going to be getting out, and you've tried to engage them in planning, and sometimes they've provided you with relatives, but then those relatives aren't appropriate either, then it comes down to we have to have a permanent plan for this child, even putting aside the federal guidelines with the timeline. I mean, the reason that the timeline was established is because we realized through the trial and error of the years that having a child just linger in foster care with no sense of permanency or well-being is not good for them either. And children do well when they are in families and when they know that that is the home that they're going to stay in, and that is their permanent place. And so for the child's best interest, we want to achieve permanency. And so if the parent is not able to either do that themselves or help us plan for somebody who can do it, then I think that's where we start looking at the termination. So it's not, it may look like it's because the parent is incarcerated, but if you really boil it down to the details, it's more that they are unable or unwilling to make a plan for the child despite the incarceration. So I think that's what we would be looking at. And I think that's an important distinction when you're looking at those cases.
I guess it's me now, right? I'll put out the perspective I'm gonna be coming from. I'm probably coming from different from what they are. I'm coming from more of a security perspective, because number one, you know, being incarcerated, it has to be some type of security there. You know, a lot of times we look at a lot of contact visits and everything like that. What we do is most of our live visits are behind glass. And like you said, unless the judge says, you know, unless somebody get a court order and they say, okay, we need to see an inmate, you know, need to see an inmate, then they'll see him that way. But otherwise, they see him behind glass. One of the main reasons behind it is contraband. People bringing drugs in jail, and then people bringing cell phones in jails and stuff like that. We want to try to cut it off. Now, our AMS facility, they don't have contact visitation unless it's court ordered. All that visitation is done on computer screens. That individual does not leave his unit that he's in, his cell block he's in. He goes to a little room within his cell block to the computer, it'll lean back down to the Visitation Act. So, that way, that cuts back, like I said, that cuts back on a lot of contraband too, coming into facilities. As far as I heard as far as special visits with children. Now, one of the things, like I said, they do encourage, if inmates have kids, for them to bring their kids to visitation. We encourage that from when the time they come to jail, when the time they come in, bring the children with you. Because the department I run, we have to make a visitation list. And we tell them, put these people on your visitation list. But for one thing they can't do is just, say like if a husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend, they have kids in common, they have problems with each other, and they assault, one another. They can't see each other. They can't visit each other. As long as the case going on, they cannot see each other. Now, there's another catch to that. Say if they had kids. Say if the father's incarcerated and the mother, she's out. Now, most 90% of the time, there's going to be a protective order placed against him. Or we can go further in jail, they're co-defendants. They actually can't see each other. We strike their name from the visitation list. And have any of y'all heard of somebody named Susan Clark? She works at the Commonwealth Attorney's office. She'll call us at the jail and tell us, don't put this person on that person's visitation list because they're a victim in the case. Now, how do the kids come to see their father in jail without the mother bringing them? What they have to do, we have this thing called a juvenile visitation request, which that mother has to take that, we're gonna bring the kids down, they have to get a certified, they have to get a notarized letter saying that those kids can come to the jail to visit their father. It has to be notarized, and somebody else can bring them. Now that's part of our policy, unless, like she said earlier, unless it's foster care, then that's something totally different, like that. So they have to go do it that way for them to come in. Now, another point is, if somebody want to come to jail to, like say CASA, if y'all want to talk to them before court, there's no problem. You just get with the sheriffs or whatever, say we need to talk to them, and they'll let you do it. Now, even if you want to go to talk to them, even if they got to go, I done seen it done. I done seen J&D Court to call us and say, we need so-and-so to come to court. We don't ask no questions, we just bring them. Now, I think you done ran into cases where you have had clients come to court just so you can see them. I don't know if that didn't happen to you before.
I'm not sure I understood.
Okay, say if you got somebody, you would just want to talk to them, and sometimes they in court at a transportation order, they'll take them right up to court so the lawyer can talk to them. That happens. I mean, they can do that. Whatever the judge tells us to do, we're gonna do it. Now we don't play around with court orders. It's not the judge say, bring this person, get a contact visit. We don't question that. We do whatever the judge tells us to do. And another thing, when like I think she was talking about earlier, bringing kids to how young should a child be to come to jail? You gotta understand some of those kids. If you keep bringing them to jail all the time, they're gonna notice different things. Because I know one 5-year-old, he went and told his dad, why do you have the same clothes on every time I come see you? Because they had those orange jumpsuit. Kids ask questions all the time. We had 2 kids, my wife and 2, we had 2 kids come to our church. Their dad was in jail, but the mama never told me. They used to tell you the dad was at work. Like that. It hurts because, and the kids knew I knew their dad, but they never knew the connection of how I knew their dad, like that.
Until he was a cop.
Huh?
Until he was a cop.
Yeah, but they never know, to this day they still don't know the connection to how I know their dad so good, like that.
Sergeant, as far as appointments go, I know it's always good to call ahead,
Right.
for a CASA worker, but is there any time where a CASA worker needs to come right away? Is there any kind
Yeah,
of?
just call our front, like, special Lynchburg, just call the front line, but they can accommodate you. Just tell them what you need and they'll accommodate you. And that, call as early as you can. And we was talking another thing about phone conferences. Now, we have done phone conferences with DSS, because I'm the one who used to schedule all the phone conferences at the jail down there. And basically, I think phone conferences is a good way to go, because most of the time, like, say you really had to talk to somebody at DSS, and the parent is, you have the parent has an appointment there with you, and you say, okay, you get to talk to, well, we don't question that. DSS say, we want to have a phone conference with you. Okay, fine. All we do is we set that up. We don't ask you. We just tell you who you need to talk to. That's it. We don't question you who you have to talk to. And that also go for lawyers too. Yes, we do a lot of phone conferences for lawyers too. And they want them. They just call them. They just go ahead and set. They just go ahead and set it up. Let's see.
So tell us more about the FaceTime you mentioned.
Okay, what we're gonna come is supposed to come this summer, and what we're doing is we're gonna be getting tablets, and so the inmate gonna be able to make phone calls and everything like that on tablets, and we're also looking to have video, some type of visitation on the tablets. Now some of the jails, like there's one behind River, they're already doing it. Behind River, the way they get it, so nobody comes to their jail to visit anybody. Everything's done by Skype, and all of that. And only people come to their jail to visit is professional visits. Roanoke City, they doing the same thing.
So this is something that's.
Oh, it's coming.
done all across the state?
It's coming. It's all across the nation. It's coming. And it's because basically, like I said, when you go back to that word contraband, they're trying to keep it out of the jail the best they can. And like I said, when they start doing these visitations that way, that'll be a good thing.
So will they still have to have money in an account? Will it cost?
Yes.
For them to do that? Okay.
Yes, but a lot of times too, it's cheaper sometimes because, like, see, with the main problem is, like, our visitation is like this. Inmates, they get one visit a week, and we have visitation from Monday through Saturday. But whatever housing unit they're in, that's what they get visitation, and that also depends on the security level. If they're high security level, they only go get one visit, 15-minute visit. They can have up to 6 people in the visitation at the time. That includes children. If they're at a low security level, they get 2 visits. on another day, they get 2 visits, and they can have up to 6 people, for each time. Then, like, you get into our trustee unit, they have their visits on, for prime example, they have their visits on Saturdays, and they get 3 visits. And and the visits are only 15 minutes, like that. So but like a lot of people, like we also have like pastors. They come in the same way. They come in, they can just call in and set up appointments and stuff like that.
And can I ask a clarifying question about that? So you said however many visits they're allowed per week. That's personal visits, is that right? So if it's a professional visit like their attorney or CASA or social worker, that's different.
That don't even include.
We're not knocking grandma off the list for them. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So the clergy have the same entrance as.
And like when the clergy come in, you just can't see a guy coming in off the street saying, I'm Reverend so-and-so. You got to have your credentials and all this stuff when you come down. They do.
Everybody's preaching.
Yeah. And they got to have their papers and everything. And I don't know what type of vetting process they do, but they come down and see them, like that.
Who is considered a professional? Is it a lawyer?
Lawyer's professional. And why I say lawyers, because lawyers can come, basically a lawyer can come to jail anytime they want to.
So the social services or CASA per se?
Social service, they consider professional business.
What about CASA? Would you consider that a professional?
They kind of like on the borderline. They kind of like on the borderline professional. Depends on how you look at it. Right. Like Horizon. Horizon is they're professional. They're professional business because we use Horizon for all kind of stuff.
Cool.
But see, it's no problem. But like say if CASA came in with social service, they ain't no problem. You know, like that. Because basically, I think we had a case with social service not too long ago. It was the girl. Well, she her daughter was her daughter died, and social service came down there just like that. The judge came to the front line and said, "We need to talk to this individual ASAP." They got her down there. She was in my department. Put her in the visitation. She talked to them like that. You know, like that. So they work pretty quick.
I'm just curious, Courtney, what percentage of incarcerated parents actually have a better relationship once getting out with their children? Actually,
That's a good question. You mean like a better relationship than they had before they went in?
before, or even got their children back?
So I have worked with some parents, and I know some of my coworkers have as well, who for different reasons couldn't get along with the child's other parent. And so they, prior to incarceration and prior to foster care, they kind of found themselves estranged from their children because of their relationship with the other parent. And so they sort of felt like they had a shot because now they were going through social services instead of through the other parent who they couldn't get along with. So we've definitely seen cases like that. On the whole, though, I think it's very difficult, and Crawford touched on this earlier, as far as getting custody of the children. They have so much to overcome when they get out. They've got to find a place to live. They've got to find a job. They've got to start doing these visitations with their children.
So
And
what percentage? You don't have to be specifically right, but is it 10%? Is it 5%?
I have no idea.
No idea.
No idea.
The reason why I ask is because, and this is just a statement,
Mm-hmm.
I retire from corrections, and so I kind of see a little both sides of things. And the thing about it is that, you know, in corrections, there is minimum rehabilitation. It's really almost none. To have a parent incarcerated and actually, especially with all the drugs that's out today, I've been a detox nurse, I've been a jail nurse, all of that. So I've seen some struggles with parents. So, you know, it's not a lot out there. Society, in my opinion, and I'm entitled, is not, it's society in certain states does not forgive. And consider, you know, that I don't feel that they have a chance, not a chance to even get counseling, not even a chance to get substance abuse counseling, not a chance to get parenting counseling while they're incarcerated, not a chance once they get out. Society is so hard, and a lot of jobs won't even accept felons. A lot of jobs won't even give, a lot of people, homeowners and businesses won't even give you a house to rent because your credit is not even established or not good. So they're up so much against a lot of things. And then on top of that, they're incarcerated. And I've seen plenty, and I worked years in corrections. I've seen plenty. It is not a pleasant place. It is not a place where you can think clearly. Even if you did come out of drugs, even if you did come in there with drugs, on drugs, to actually get clean and actually have a mind to think is not an easy thing because you have so much that is challenged. First of all, being in about a 9x9 room with 2 other people in there, and everybody's headstrong, and just the struggle of even being there is and you really don't know. You really don't know until you're actually there. You know, and that's the thing, because how can you teach an incarcerated person to be a parent when they never had any education on being a parent? And how can somebody mediate two parents to get along for the interest of the child when nobody's ever mediated them? You look at the ages of the mothers now, and it's not easy. And you know, it's like a no-win situation. You got to be lucky to come out and get your child, because they're not really, a lot of them are not really even thinking about the children. They're just trying to get themselves straight. Then you got frustrated people. They want to get out. You got family members. You got lawyers that they can't reach. I mean, it is a struggle in itself, and you really, 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 really don't know that, you know, they don't see a way out. It's like going into these projects, these old projects like Darrington. If you ever drive through Darrington, there is no vision out that you can do any better. Because when you go in the first entrance of Darrington, there are apartment complexes. Then you look to your left, there's apartment complex. You look to your right, there's apartment complex. If you look out of every window in one apartment in Darrington, you don't see trees. You don't see a way out that you can even do any better until you drive back out. So I'm just speaking on a mental level. There is no way out. And nobody is thinking about that. You know, we expect for parents, you know, yeah, you got, for whatever reason you got locked up, whatever reason where you abused your child, or whether you did drugs, or whether you sold drugs, for whatever reason that you done this, there is no help. None. The state is not offering any help. The city is not offering any help. Nobody is helping these parents. Then when they get out, we expect for them to have communication with child. Half of the parents don't even want to see their children because they come to the realization that they have been broken down, and who's going to build these people back up? Because they have been broken down. And, you know, that's it. So when they come out, it is like, well, what am I to do now? So what else is it for you to do? You can't get a job. You can't get no credit. You can't get a place to live. You ain't got no money to get your lights on. So what are you going to reverse back to? An escape route, which is selling drugs, or prostitution, or getting back on drugs, or because you don't ruin every other possible thing with your family. You don't ruin the relationship with them. You can't go back to mom because you done stole. You done all this stuff like that. You can't go back to daddy. You can't go to nobody. And then on top of that, you don't have your children either.
Can I jump in for a second? So the what happens to someone in jail is it's a little bit like when you take your kids on a car trip, like a long car trip, you know, before the days when you had like video and that kind of thing. Now they just watch videos and they're happy the whole time. But in the old days, like when I was a kid, you went on a car trip and everyone just wanted to kill each other after about 3 hours. And, you know, the term is, from my understanding, is sensory deprivation disorder. It's the same thing as, well, I mean, you know, and what happens is that the cognitive functioning in their brain goes down and the fear and aggression, which is a more primitive emotion, comes up. And that is pretty much the environment in which they're functioning. So, so I do, it's a really good question about services in the jail and how do you get them in the jail. So I do as a member of AA, I'm a member of the corrections committee. So it took the problem we were having is that if you have someone who is incarcerated or who had a hard drug possession 8 years ago, and then a bunch of DUIs in between, the old way that the jail worked was if you were a felon, you could not come into the jail, period. Well, you got a whole army of like sober people now who can't come in because they had a felony from 10 years ago. So we tried to work to get that changed, and what I found out is you have to go to the sheriff. So if any of y'all have a relationship with your sheriff's kind of set the tone for your county. So Sheriff Sloan in Lynchburg, I went to talk to Sheriff Sloan. My understanding about Amherst, the reason they're more pro programs, I mean this is just kind of the scuttlebutt, is that the sheriff of that of the county, and I don't even know who he is, in Amherst, said this jail shall be pro-program. So, in terms of coming in, I find that they're much more amenable. And this is no slight against Lynchburg. The guys in Amherst will say, we got as many bad guys in Lynchburg in Amherst as they do in Lynchburg. And the guys who come over from corrections in Lynchburg, in Amherst, will say, yeah, we could do better in Lynchburg, but we just don't. And no slight to you. But this is what I hear. This is what I hear. So what I'm saying is that there's an environment and an attitude that starts with the political appointees. So sit down with your sheriff to say, Sheriff, do y'all have AA in your jail? Do you have NA in your jail? Do you have an anger management class in your jail? I don't know that there's an anger management class like out in Amherst or in Lynchburg, I know there's not one in Rustburg. So you would think like anger management is like one of the foundational things that they do when you got domestic violence. Everyone goes to anger management. Well, if they go to jail, they don't get anger management. So, it's kind of a no-brainer. So the way I understand most services work in Blue Ridge Regional Jails, it's volunteers. So, they will, if you can provide the credentials, they will accommodate you, but you have to do it on your dime, and you have to be motivated to provide these services. So it's like you're saying. I mean, it's a difficult environment.
I wish we could blame it on the sheriff. I wish we could blame it on the jail, but no, it's far beyond that. It started with Congress. It started with your senators. It started with the ones who really can make the choices. We can't blame it on the jail because everybody wants to blame it on the jail. Everybody wants to blame it on, but the jail is just housing inmates. The jail, I mean, I've been in
Well, I'm just saying that politically speaking, you can get the muscle to, if you get these decision makers to change it, because I'll tell you, I went to, and I will not mention names, I went to see this one gentleman, and as a correction officer, he told me, I said, I want to bring AA meetings to the jail. He said, these people are never going to change. They are stuck. They are never going to change. I said, well, why don't you take them out behind the jail and shoot them, if that's your attitude, I mean, it was like, it was so like narrow-minded about, and that's what I'm saying is that there's a culture in corrections, and this is not slight to anybody, which is security first, which is paramount, I get it. But we can do more to offer services. Like doing counseling through the glass doesn't make sense to me. But a court order could change that, because as he said, they'll do what the judge tells them to do, but I didn't know there was a problem that way. No one ever approached me about it. I imagine the county or city attorney could have a draft motion, that the judge signs that says, you shall allow whatever counselor to have contact visit with the inmate, and that would probably
we do it now. We do it now. We have mental health counselors at all jails. Now the thing about when mental health counselors the thing about it is they have contact visits with the people, but this is the catch: you got to help them. Now you got to help them. Now, an officer stands outside the door when the counselor's in there with the person. They can't be in there with them because they help them.
Now,
but like I said, that goes back to probably the officer that said that probably been there forever, overworked, underpaid, and don't have enough help. Plain and simple. It still goes back to.
Now that guy had all the help in the world. It was just.
That's what you say. You on the outside.
Oh, I know. So, in terms
I'm in
of
the jail. I see it's not enough officers in the jail. It's not enough medical staff in the jail officers and the medical staff work like a dog. And you got anywhere from 600 to 700 inmates, and there's only one person in the cell one officer to how many people in the unit?
60
And-
to 70.
Exactly.
Well, well, my point is to
I'm
offer
done.
hope.
I really do appreciate the points you're bringing up, and actually, I think that that's a great. I would love to hear. Can you speak a little bit more about the services that are available in
Well,
jail?
some of the
and-
services, like what we do, is we have a program where they bring prisoners like that last year left in prison.
Mhm.
They'll come to the jail and they'll find them a job and everything so they can get acclimated back into the community. They also have a program called Progressive Release, which is done maybe about 3-4 times a year, which we pull people from all of our jails to teach them life skills and everything that way. And I think, Twan, because you're in that life skills program, aren't you?
No, there is a small reentry program.
Reentry, that's what it
Maybe
is.
about 10
Yeah.
inmates in the program.
Right, and they use it, have them in the prison centers at that time, you know. And also, we also teach, like I said, we have the preachers, they have church services on Sundays, or sometimes they have them during the week also. But, they're working on getting more programs in. They have GED program.
Yeah.
That's that, we got that.
Mhm.
And also the state says that anybody that's under the age of 23 that's considered special ed, they have to give them some type of education.
Okay.
And we have instructors from the school system come to jail to teach these kids.
Here's a thought, because I see, like I said, I'm in the, I don't live there or work there, but I'm in there fairly frequently, and a lot of the guys I see, they have, they're meth addicts or alcoholics or coke addicts or whatever they are, and a lot of that is masking mental illness. Some varying degree. A lot of it is PTSD. A lot of it is PTSD. They're all just about to a person. They've all been beaten by a drunk father, and so it's mind-boggling that we don't. As you're saying, as a culture and as a community, really, it's a community priority. Why don't we figure out how to offer PTSD to some of these folks and really tackle recidivism? But we lock them up and hope for the best. But yeah, and then in terms of actually getting medical treatment, these guys are overworked. Those nurses and the doctors. They see, and you put your name on you write your form, and they may see you in 3 weeks. There's a guy the other day I saw who had back surgery and was released to jail the same day, put back in jail the same day, and it is brutal. It is the physical. Just that if you have a toothache, they will pull it. You're not going to get treatment for your tooth. They'll just pull it, and you might see the guy 4 weeks later, and if you miss him, you got to wait another 4 weeks with a rotten tooth in your head. It is. You wouldn't wish it upon your enemy. Some of the circumstances that you run into there. Medication for just some of the for mental illness is, they give them a lot of. There's a situation out in Rustburg where apparently the psychiatrist was telling we're on tape.
We are.
Anyway, so anyway, it's really very difficult for these guys to get, and if they need serious medication, a lot of times they have to go into isolation, I believe. They can't be in general population with certain medications that they may need. So the medical care it's extraordinarily difficult to provide for 600 inmates, all of whom have some problem that needs attention, and it's bad.
So I'm curious, for some of the support systems that you said are some of the support programs, are they limited to, are there qualifications you have to
Yes.
to get those
Yes.
services?
And just like you said, a lot of times too, like I said, we got max units, maximum
Right.
security units up there. Guys whose behavior, don't want them to be in the program. That's because of their behavior.
Okay.
So we have to, we can't put them. Okay, we can't mix them up together.
Right.
like that. Now, they'll be eligible for the program once their behavior gets to where it's supposed to be at.
And can you also speak to, so we had a case where the parent was a trustee, so that actually prevented them from participating in getting their GED and some other
No,
programs.
they can, let me tell you like that. Now,
Okay.
if the parent was a trustee, they can get the GED if they want it.
Okay.
And I think a lot of times they decide they don't want to go. And until they'll go to court and say, the judge say, what have you done? Well, I worked a lot. Nah, they didn't work that much. I mean, because they do afford you time to get into the GED program, to get your GED, if that's what you want to do. What's it, be a trustee in GED? Oh, sure, most definitely. Because most likely if it was a female, it's only really 2 trustee parts they can work in the jail I'm at, that's in the laundry or outside. And they'll let him get time. Yes, he can. He's gonna have to give up being that. See, this is the catch to that. Probably what happened was he said, they said, you want to get your GED, you can't have this trustee job. We can give you another one. He didn't want that other job. Because he wanted these perks with this job. But you got to sit down and think about which is more important, me getting my GED or these perks. And now he still would have been a trustee, but he wanted to be this type of trustee.
And a couple other logistical questions for you. So, can you talk about, this may not be something that's available to us all the time, but the jail records their calls, correct?
Now, only calls they don't record is lawyer calls.
Okay.
And what the inmate has to do is, when they come to jail, they know their lawyer's number. They'll give the lawyer's number, so those calls will not be recorded.
And is it ever, I guess I'm thinking especially of cases where there's domestic violence and we're trying to determine whether one of the parents is maintaining contact with the abuser, following court orders for no contact, etc. So is it possible sometimes for CASA to find out like who the inmate has been talking to, or?
Now, only thing way I can think they could do that is just got to get with that individual's, whoever the investigator is on the case.
Okay.
Give it to the investigator, and the investigator, they'll let you know.
Okay.
They'll let you know who's doing it because he has a court order, no contact. And see, this is the catch with that. He can have, we can on his phone account, they can have that number blocked. But these inmates, what they'll do, they get another inmate to call that individual. They'll talk to him that way, which they do all the time. And they find that then when they go to court, and I know Judge Payne don't play that over there. You go to court and you find they've been talking, they've been writing each other, it's.
Okay, thanks. And can you also speak to, this is a question for either of y'all, how is it determined whether the parent will be incarcerated locally or further away? Some of it depends on the length of their sentence, is that right?
Well, if it's anything, see, the way they look at it, if they get sentenced to 1 year, that's prison time. Now, they can go to prison. Now, if it's 300, if they get sentenced to 12 months, that's local time. Now, and within the Blue Ridge Regional Jail, now say if they got the charges out of Lynchburg, they can transfer you to Halifax. That's one of our jails down there. Or it's the same with somebody in Halifax and get time down there. They can transfer them to Benton County to do their time. Like it. Do we do that? Yeah, they do that quite a bit. They do that. Sometimes they do that,
And what's the difference between a jail and a prison? What's the difference between jail and prison?
Prison is where my clients always want to end up.
Yeah.
Because prison has more resources, more programs.
Oh.
They can saw a guy last week, and he was the head maintenance guy at Buckingham Prison. And he loved it. He gets to run around and fix stuff, and air conditioners and all kinds of stuff. So that guy, but yeah, that they do want to end up there. But what ends up happening is, depending on how long you have, they'll either keep you in Lynchburg, even if you're doing felony time. They can keep you in Lynchburg or Amherst or the Blue Ridge Regional Jail. So, so you could have a year left on your sentence and still pull it all in the jail. which the guys don't like because they have so many fewer services and so many fewer resources.
Well, just like they get federal time, it's the same thing. They get federal time, and they have about federal time. They can go anywhere in the United States.
Okay.
But like you said, they get to this thing, they get more services. That's why they want to go.
Is it more conducive to visitation at prison as far as contact visits
Oh, yes.
to the parent?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they get, you go to someone like Buckingham or Dillman is what it is. They'll get like contact visit, 2 hours at a minimum. But this is a catch to that now. You have to, they do a background check on you now for visitation to these prisons now. So it ain't like it used to be. So like, if you're on one person's visitation list at a prison, you can't be on nobody else's visitation list. So they done changed a lot as far as visitation.
But each visitor has to have a background check before they visit. What about children?
I don't know about children. I think as long as they're under the age of 18. But this is the catch too. They do that when you go there, like they have that thing, like you can be searched. When you go in there, they feel like you bringing contraband. They will search you, strip search you.
Even little children?
Yeah, because the good children come in with diapers and stuff on. They make you take the diapers. They do that now. They make you take the diapers off. Because like I say, it goes back to contraband. Because I know you watch the shows on TV sometimes. You look at all this, you wonder how these drugs get in prison. You think, how does that happen?
So what is the decision, what qualifies you for jail versus prison? Is it the severity of your
It's
act or?
generally, as you were saying, if it's a felony, first it'd be a felony, and then if you have a year or more, that qualifies you for the prison. But they might not take you to the prison because they may just keep you here. I guess for space reasons or something like that.
Well, we can hold up. We done held people downtown for 3 years.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So in the timeline of our cases, from anywhere from 13 months to at the outer limit 17 months, you could have someone who gets arrested fairly soon when the case begins and not be sentenced until after the foster care case is over. Because these criminal matters can last a very long time. You've got your bond hearings, and you got your preliminary hearings, and then it's obviously it's certified at your preliminary hearing, and then you go to your trial. But if you want a jury trial or there are extenuating circumstances, it just keeps getting pushed out. You change the lawyer, it gets pushed out more, and so these things can last a very long time.
But it's a good thing that it's one good thing that you get that the parents that you try to keep families together. You want parents to have a relationship with the kids. Why they incarcerated. And hopefully, if they get out, they'll be able to have a better relationship with the kids once they get out. One of the worst things to see is we have a lot of people come to jail for child support. A whole lot. I mean, it didn't get the time that got better over the years. We used to have something called 365. Judge back in the day used to give you 365. He did a whole year in jail. I mean, this is day for day. Wasn't no good time or none of this stuff. You did a whole year in jail because you didn't pay your child support. Now they done got a little lenient on it. Now you're only doing 30 days or 60 days now. Like that. So, but I think they're some of the most angriest people when they come to jail because they got kids they have to take care of. They don't want to take care of them. I mean, I always looked at it this way. It shouldn't have got to that level where the judge had to take care of the child. That's where I always said it. If the judge got to take care of it, then, you shouldn't even have no kids anyway. If a judge got to dictate that.
I do have a question about that, because you have a parent that's incarcerated, they can't earn money to pay their child support, so then when they get out, they owe all this back child support.
And they probably lost their job.
They have a short
Yeah.
period of time to pay that, plus they have their fines, they can't get their driver's license till they pay their fines. Then they go back to jail because they weren't able to pay their child
Well,
support.
let me tell you what that is. the courts, they know that. When you get out, they know that. And you honest and you go to them and say, look, I'm looking up constantly. Most of the time you're gonna have a probation officer. You see, as long as you're out there trying to do what's right, you're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right, you know, as long as you're doing it right now. When they say it's hard to find a job, I can name 10 places right now that's hiring right now convicted felons. Right now off the bat. You know, if that's if the person wanna work. That's if they work. They got child support. Like I said, they're not hard on child support like they used to be and everything, but everybody wants, like you said, everybody, you know, person go to prison for 5 years, come back out. He gonna get a bill from the court. He gonna get a bill from child support. I mean, everybody's gonna be wanting money. And so then he get a check, and how much can they take? What, 65%? With the max they can take out? 65?
Maybe, I don't know exactly.
Yeah, they can take that much out of the check. So you make $100, you're gonna take home probably 40 because everybody else gonna eat.
Yeah.
But everybody else gonna eat up, you know.
And
But-
well, go ahead.
But when that happens though, that qualifies you for other services like food stamps, housing, Medicaid, and all this other stuff. You see.
So what are some of those companies that hire felons?
Yes.
Sedesco,
Uh-huh.
over at Sedesco over at Liberty University, Home and Masonry, they hire. Just about every restaurant in Lynchburg hire, but some Lynchburg College won't hire a convicted felon, I can tell you that now. Liberty University hires quite a few.
It's good to know.
And what's the other place called? It's a restaurant, like I said, I know just every Burger King will, just about every McDonald's will. Wendy's, yeah, they will hire you.
And Courtney, can you speak to a little bit, so from the DSS perspective, when you have a parent that gets out of jail, right, kind of like everyone was saying, there's a lot to do. What are some of the barriers that you see with parents who do have a history of incarceration when they're trying to get everything set up, and how do you guys as social services help them navigate around that? So Section 8, Medicaid, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we definitely try to help them tap into the community resources. You know, they usually don't have a place to live, or at least a place that we would consider appropriate for a child. They struggle with finding a job. There are jobs out there. They've got to be willing to take what's available for them. But so we give them a list of places that we know will hire them. We'll talk to them. One thing we've been doing more of is getting FAPting for services like independent living or mental health skill building, to kind of give them a one-on-one person to help them navigate some of the resources that are out there, just for a short period of time, to help them getting established with all of their services, tapping into the community resources. For our women, there are a number of housing programs that could work with them depending on their circumstances. There's not as much out there for our dads, but I know for me, when I have worked with parents, I've encouraged them to just get into any kind of housing first and then get a job and start working, and don't hold out for that perfect place or that housing that you can bring your child home to, because there's so much that you have to do service-wise and working on building that relationship with your child through visits. So it's better to just get into anything that's appropriate for you. And so I would much rather them get in, you know, a small one-bedroom place, something like that we maybe wouldn't send their child home to, versus staying with friends or family that's going to pull them back into the lifestyle that they had before. And then just work on getting yourself established with a job and engaging in your services and coming to your visits, and then build out from there. Somebody earlier mentioned losing their driver's license. And I know that there are programs that can help with that. If you get a job, you can go through the individual court systems and get on a payment plan for your fines, which will release the hold that is on your license. And then you can also go through Humankind's Ways to Work program to help you get into a car. So those are some resources that are out there that we always make sure our parents are tapped into as well.
I like. Actually, I don't know what you think about this. I like the Gateway program down there on 12th Street. Orville and I think Lisa run that place. And the reason I like it better than like Salvation Army is that they do. I think they do a more well. Salvation Army initially is just a homeless shelter, and you're in with addicts and alcoholics, and it's pretty rough. But if you can get into Gateway, coming out of the prison, you have to have a referral from somebody in the mental health department, from a nurse, or in Orville, who is second in charge out there at Gateway, knows all these folks, and so the mental health nurse generally at one of these jails will then make a referral over to Gateway, and then Orville will run an application. And the neat thing about it is that they feed them. They ensure that they're sober and clean off drugs. They help them get jobs, and it's a start. It's a really good start because they have a lot of services, or they get a lot of help and a lot of support, and everybody's in the same boat. So if you're coming out of jail, 4 months at the Gateway to stay clean and sober, to get a job, get your license back, have a roof over your head, and then move into something you can actually afford, makes a lot of sense. But again, it's very timing sensitive because of the guidelines and that kind of thing. But it's an option. I think it's a really good one for men.
And is it correct that with a felony on your record, is Section 8 housing not available to you? And is it correct that Medicaid, you can't get Medicaid if you have a felony?
It depends on the charge. If it's a drug
Distribution.
That's what I was thinking.
charge, then no.
No to both Medicaid and Section 8 housing, or?
I'm talking about now.
Okay. Okay, that's right. Okay. Crawford, a final question that I can think of. Can you explain what's the difference between GAL and attorney? We hear you guys in court kind of wrangling about, hey, Judge, will you make me the GAL now? So what's
Judge, maybe the GAL so I can actually get paid on this job. The Garden Head Lightums, they are appointed for incarcerated parents, and they're compensated at the rate of $55 an hour and $75 in court. It's really not a lot, but it's enough. So the Garden Head Lightum then basically has the same rights in terms of communicating with the client and visiting and all that kind of thing. But it's a legal requirement that I guess they consider the inmate to be, I don't know, incapacitated.
Incapacitated is what we've been told.
Incapacitated, and so requiring a Garden Head Lightum. Now the Garden Head Lightum, so on some of these cases they may not bring the inmate to court. Like I talked to Jennifer out in Campbell. I'll call her today to ask about this. And she said in Campbell County, they only absolutely bring the client or the incarcerated parent to the last hearing. All the others, they won't transport them. If the incarcerated person is actually in Rustburg, they will bring them, but not if they're other places. Now, other courts, maybe in Lynchburg, do it differently, and they'll bring them regardless. So it's really judge specific until you get to that final hearing, and that's where you get into your Garden Head Lightums. If you don't have a client in court, you can make agreements on behalf of your client, presumably after talking to your client, but if it's in your client's best interest, like agreeing to a return home plan or something like that, which is sort of a no-brainer. Doesn't require, you wouldn't make a decision if you felt like you were jeopardizing your client. You better know what the situation is before. But those easy ones, as a Garden Head Lightum, you could make.
And can you share information as a Garden Head Lightum guardian you're playing?
It's a little different. The guardian ad litem for the adult parent is more like an attorney, and has more rights, more similar to an attorney. For the child, of course,
Right.
you're absolutely in the same boat.
Right, okay.
That's a little
Yeah.
different.
And Crawford, also, so we've talked a lot about parents who are incarcerated locally. It's a little bit easier and we can sort of make the trip over. But how would you like us, if there's a parent that's incarcerated out of state and you're the attorney or GAL for that parent, how would you like us as CASAs to get the viewpoint of your client? How can we utilize you for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you probably, I don't know that I would be able to help you at all. I think Courtney would be a much better resource, because she's probably doing a better job than most of the attorneys at reaching out, because she has to she has to get people served and that kind of thing. So she got to know where people are and that. So I think that, I mean, if you ask, I'll tell you what I know or whatever. But Courtney's your go-to person, I think, for logistical awareness.
And also, because I was just going to say, in some cases where the parent is incarcerated out of state, sometimes it's been effective for the CASA to reach out to the parent's attorney or GAL to say, hey, what's your client's position on this? Or, and sometimes that's our best source of info, because a lot of times they have had contact with the client.
Sure, that's true too. Yeah, and then and then sometimes they've also told DSS exactly the same.
I was going to say, hopefully they've told us the same thing.
Yeah, hopefully so.
I think generally when they're incarcerated, they've at least come to accept that there's only so much they can do, and it'd be really kind of a miracle if coming out of jail or prison, they really were in a position to hit the ground running if they got out before termination, to get their kids back. It's tough. It's really kind of brutal.
How many of you guys have made a jail visit to a parent? Or what about had phone or contact by letter with an incarcerated parent? Okay. How many of you feel like you might give it a whirl now that you've had this training? Okay, I'm going to pass around evaluation forms, but also feel free, if you've got a question, go ahead and pop your hand up while we're doing that and ask away.
You probably kind of answered it already, but what are some things that you, DSS and GAL, considered whether a child is going to visit or not visit? In my particular case, the child did not visit, and the parent was incarcerated on a conviction related to this case.
So, I mean, I know for me, if the reason for the incarceration is the abuse or neglect of the child, I would be hard pressed to think that it's going to be in the child's best interest to visit with that person. Now, again, if we're talking about an older child and the parent has engaged in some form of rehabilitative services, like through outpatient counseling that we've arranged or something like that, and they are prepared to have sort of a making amends visit with the child, and the child's counselor also feels like they're in a headspace to receive that, then I can see that being beneficial. But I'm certainly going to take that into account. And if the parent has criminally offended on the child, that's going to be a big hurdle to overcome.
So I want to add, when I spoke at the Garden ad litem thing, I brought a bunch of books. So tonight I only brought one book, and it actually is this book. I don't know if y'all have read it. The Boy Raises a Dog. It's really a fantastic book. It's and it's very hopeful. It goes into the effects of trauma and neglect on children and their brain development, and how when we change the child's environment, provide love and care and nurturance, then you see amazing healing take place. So it's for all the negativity. You know, we're wired in a way to recover. You know, and with proper help and proper community. So, and this, so I gave this to one of my friends in out in Rustburg, and he said that is really like an awesome book. He says I gave it to another guy in the pod. He loved it too. So it really like strikes a chord with these kids, you know, these guys who are like little kids, you know, but now they're big kids who, you know, got beaten around by their fathers.
James or Crawford, either one of you guys, can you talk us through a little bit, like suspended sentence? What is that? So sometimes when we're looking up online on the court website and we see the sentences like this month suspended, or this many months suspended sentence, this many months of supervised probation. What do some of those terms mean?
Well, basically, okay, let's take a 5-year sentence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, the judge sentenced somebody to 5 years, then he'll suspend, let's say you suspend everything except 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then he'll put him on 18 months of supervised probation.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing about it is that sentence actually isn't over until that 5th year. And what happens is, say like it's a drug charge. I'd say like, he gets another drug charge while he's on that 18-month supervised probation. The judge can bring back up that suspended time. Say if he had 3 years suspended time left. See, basically, he walking in there with 3 years. He's looking at 3 years, plus whatever else the judge gonna give him. See, so that's a funny thing, you know, to see these big sentences. Judge give him 40 years and suspend 35. You know, I mean, it's crazy.
So I hear out in Campbell County, I mean other counties too, but in Campbell County, the probation violation day, they say, the attorneys with the Commonwealth will just tell me it's absolutely depressing because they're all, I mean not all, but a lot of the people coming back through are dirty for meth or coke or whatever it is, and people that you hoped would do well. So I had this client on a it was a possession of meth charge, and she was just like all excited about getting out, and so Judge Cook, and this was a young lady who had participated in parenting her child, seemed to have her head in the right place. It is not a foster care case, but I guess I'll cut to the end. So Judge Cook suspended, or like let her out early so she could go to Roads to Recovery's female house. You know, there's one of the local recovery houses. She was there 2 weeks, had everything to live for, and relapsed from meth. You know, and I just got reappointed on a case for her, another drug charge. So it's amazing. I tell you, this is the amazing part, and never believe a parent who tells you, I have children, I will never do drugs, I will never do meth, I will never drink again. It is never ever true. They will invariably put their drink or their coke or their needle or their whatever they're smoking before their children. Not everyone, but they can never tell you I will never do that because it's just not true. It's just not true. Like I said, a lot of my friends are addicts and alcoholics, and that is, you know, women driving their kids around drunk and, you know, all the rest. It's crazy.
Crawford, have you had any clients yet go through, I know Lynchburg and Bedford, right, are starting some kind of drug court. Yeah. Have you been seeing people go through it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What does I mean, I know it's really early to say, but what is kind of success rate like?
Well, I think in Lynchburg I've seen quite a few violate.
Sure.
They
But
gave
also,
the judge give them, you know, they go tell the judge, hey, the judge give them chances, but they violated, and I know judge in Lynchburg, he'll just lock it back up. Just, you know.
and I feel like our J&D judges are good about communicating that relapse is part of the recovery process, and we kind of anticipate that and take it into account.
Yeah.
I think that's true, but I think in the conversation I've had to have with parents a lot is that unfortunately that relapse is not conducive to the foster care timeline. So just because you've gotten clean and then you've had a relapse, it doesn't mean you're going to be an addict forever. It's a natural part of the process for many, many people. But unfortunately, it doesn't go well with the foster care timeline. That's what we look at a lot, unfortunately, is a parent who does get clean and does the work, and gets really far into their timeline, and then they have a relapse. Well, I mean, we can't send a child home in those circumstances, but now we're at the end of the timeline, and this is the circumstances that we're in. And so that's a conversation I've had to have with quite a few parents. And I know the judges have talked about that as well, just sort of giving them support while also, saying we have to achieve permanency, because that's what's best for the child. But it doesn't mean that you have to go forward and be in addiction mode forever.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming out. I hope it was useful for you. Feel free to stick around if you have any final questions, but thanks a bunch.
Thank you.